From the 22 News Plus studio, this is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of In Focus. I am your host, Patrick Berry. We're here in the 22 News Plus studios. Across the desk from me today, we have State Senator Jacob Oliveira. He is with the Hamden, Hampshire, and Worcester District. Senator, thank you so very much for joining me. I know your official name is Jacob. Everybody calls you Jake, but,
Unless you're my family, then you can call me Jacob, but that's about it.
Just don't use your middle name, right? Like my mother, you use the middle name comes out and, you're really in trouble.
Yeah, my middle name is my dad's name, so it's a full Jacob Richard. So you knew that you were in trouble when you were a kid if your mom said that to you.
Absolutely. So how long have you been a state senator?
So I've been on the Senate side now since the January of 2023. So
Okay.
I'm in my third year as a state senator, but my fifth year as a legislator. I served one term in the House, but prior to that, I did 16 years in local government. So believe it or not, I celebrated this year my 20th year in an elective capacity.
Wow.
Representing the town of Ludlow in some form.
So going back in time, you're a high school kid, all right? Why this career path? Why did you want to be an elected official? Why did you want to make Ludlow a better community?
It was all around education. And in the early 2000s, we saw budget cuts coming from the state government when we hit that mini recession that came right after 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
Our community, my community in the town of Ludlow, I was a high school freshman, and we were facing cuts to programs to our school district. And I actually went as a student, as a 15-year-old, to town meeting, which is our legislative body. We're a representative town meeting in Ludlow still to this day. And I spoke about the need to invest in education. And if you pull dollars away from your schools, you're going to impact things like your property values. You're going to impact the quality of life of the residents of that district. And so as I got older and at the ripe old age of 16, I became the student rep of the school committee and really saw the role that the state level played in education policy, particularly funding. And I fought very hard as a student, as a town meeting member, and then as a school committee member, and now as a state legislator to ensure that our school districts get their fair share of resources because everybody deserves access to a high quality education.
Is it easier to do or harder to do than you thought as that 16-year-old?
It's actually, I think, a little easier, right?
Really?
When you're 16 years old, you have the weight of the world you see in front of you instead of behind you.
Right.
And it can be a little intimidating sometimes. And then as you grow older and you hear and you talk to people, there's always this funny statement that people make. They're like, you're like, you go into a meeting if you're a new employee and you'll be like, oh man, look at all the experience that person has. I'll never get there. Then you spend a little time and you're like, okay, I can be on level footing with that person. And then you stay there long enough and you're like, how the heck did that person get there? You know a lot more than they do now.
Right.
So I think that's a natural evolution. So when you're younger, you see all these different issues that are coming up and you want to impact change. You have a lot of enthusiasm. You have a lot of excitement. And so trying to give back in the way that you can, whether it's public service, whether it's getting involved with another passion of yours, that's the way to kind of impact change.
Do you find that your experience in local government, before you took the state reps or the state senator seat, your experience in local government primed you for that next level of service on the state level?
Absolutely. I mean, you see a lot of state legislators coming from local government beforehand. You see a lot of select board members. You see city councilors. You see school committee members. You see people that were involved with their finance committee. And if you look at the legislature as a whole, I don't have the stat in front of me, but I'd say a good majority of folks started out at the local level first and then saw how state decisions impact the local level,
Right.
and that's what propels them to run for that. And it goes across the board, I think. There are some legislators that come directly from the private sector, or they come from another sector of the public side, and they want to impact change. But all of us, all 200 people that get elected to the legislature every 2 years, we use our experiences. And a lot of times working with local elected officials, especially when you represent a very diverse district like I do, I have 12 communities varying forms of local government, everything from mayor, city councils, to town managers, town administrators, to town councils, to rep town meetings,
Wow.
to open town meetings, sizes
Everything.
of communities
Yeah.
that are as small as 5,000, going all the way to the city of Springfield that has over 150,000.
Right.
That is a type A mayor council form of government. You have to be able to work with that. And it actually really prepared me for the first chairmanship that I had on the Senate side, which was chair of the Municipalities and Regional Government Committee. That is a very process-heavy committee, but focuses in on our 351 cities and towns.
So the experience of just general governmental experience, you think, aided you? And do you think, like, people who come in from the business world who've never served, do you think that holds them back a little? That procedurally they may not understand, how government works. They've got these grand ideas, and then they come in, having never held an elective office, even like a school committee, a city council, whatever it might be. They just don't understand the process and think that they can just automatically get things done.
Well, I think everybody comes with their experience that can help. And I think that's good to have a diversity of experience when you're a legislator. But it's certainly a learning curve if you've never worked in local government and you've never worked with local elected officials. And so I think you always have an advantage of that depth of experience when you bring people together. And that's what a legislature is. It's bringing people from a variety of experiences together, representing their districts, their communities, for the greater good of the Commonwealth. And that's what we all try to do, regardless of our experience.
And if you do get elected, that means there's a population that supports you, that's behind you, that believes in you, and feels that you represent their thought process, their way of life.
Yeah, and I think it's also about showing leadership. So a lot of times you're privy to information that the general public might not have. And so you need to make a best decision with the information that you have at the time. And so voters go to the voting booth and they put some trust into you to make the right decision with the information that you have because of your position. And I think that's a way of looking at representative government, that as we celebrate our 250th anniversary as a country, we need to remind ourselves that, it's not just a popularity contest. It's not just going to the ballot box and checking the box for someone that agrees with you 100%. Because not all of us do. But you want people in those roles who can take in all the information and make the best educated decision on behalf of the people that they represent.
Perfect segue into our first commercial break. We're here with State Senator Jake Oliveira. We'll be right back after this.
This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry. This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Welcome back, everyone, to the 22 News Plus studios. Sitting across the desk from me this morning is State Senator Jake Oliveira, talking about all the things that are going on at the State House, and a couple of things that are big news right now. I want to start out with what most people recognize every single day is Chapter 90 funding to our local communities. Bigger picture, explain to me what Chapter 90 funding is, and then we'll dig down a little bit more.
So transportation is a big priority, I think, of us in the legislature. We're number one in education in Massachusetts. We're number one in healthcare. What we're not number one in the state is in transportation funding, going to support our roads and bridges. We are an older state with a lot of older bridges that were built over 100 years ago. But we also operate in a system where the Commonwealth picks up for our large highways, think the Mass Pike and different state roadways. But we also have pots of funds that go to help our cities and towns. And so a lot of times, if you're driving on the road and you see a pothole, or if you see an issue with the road, a lot of times that's handled by local government. So what the state does is they created a few decades ago something called Chapter 90 funding, which is funding that flows from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to our 351 cities and towns. For the last 30 years, that formula that decides what a community gets is based on a 3-peg stool. And the pegs of those stool, which it's built on, include things like number of jobs within a community, the population of the community, and miles of roadway. Obviously, the first two for Western Massachusetts isn't that beneficial.
Right.
Because we have fewer people,
Yep.
less jobs, but we have a
That's why
lot
we
more.
live here.
Yeah, and we have
Fewer
a lot
people.
more roadway, though. And so we actually changed the funding formula this year for additional dollars that we invested by nearly growing that pot from 200 million to 300 million, then adding other buckets that communities can apply for things like culverts that are often not talked about, but when they fail, they can wash away roadways completely and really cause traffic and public safety issues. So we built that new funding on that third leg of the stool, which is miles of roadway. And because of that, Western Mass communities, most of them received double-digit percentage increases. In fact, some of them even beyond doubled what they received in the previous 30 years in that fund. Go ahead.
Does that money come with caveats? Because I always like to ask that question. Hey, we're going to give you a bunch of money, but, so does, say, your district, we'll pick Ludlow.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, we're going to give you X amount of money, but you need to do this.
Well, you need to spend it in transportation. So
right, but I mean, does the responsibility then come back to the local community to say, all right, now we've got, I'm just making round numbers, $100 million, making it up. Okay, we now get to determine locally, like the locally Ludlow locally elected officials, try saying that 3 times fast, determine what the money's spent on? Or does the state then say, okay, we just gave you this money, you got to fix that bridge, you got to fix that roadway?
Nope, there's a lot of flexibility to the cities and towns. So this is part of their budgeting each and every year. And one of the frustrations that our city and town leaders had for many years is that they would get that funding so late into the construction season that they would have to put off projects until the following year. So one of the goals that we tried to do is get that money out the door early so communities can bank on it when they're building out their budgets. So you look at a community like Springfield. In Springfield, they got about $3.5 million over the last few years. Now they're getting $6.5 million. Wow. Almost double the amount of money that's going in to help out with Chapter 90. Take another large community that I represent, Belchertown and land area that has a lot of roadways.
Right.
They went from getting about $600,000 to getting over $1.5 million in Chapter 90 funding this year. And so that'll go for that community to determine what roads need to be repaved, what roads need to be repaired, what culverts or sidewalks. And that's another thing. Sidewalks. I walk every morning. I go on a 4-mile loop in the town of Ludlow. Sidewalks are an important part of it, especially for kids, especially for mobility issues. And you want to make sure that communities have the funding that's there. So that was actually making sure that we invest in that third leg of the stool in miles of roadway was a collaboration of all the legislators from Western Massachusetts coming together saying, if we're putting more money into this pot, it needs to be in an equitable way that helps out Western Massachusetts. And I'm proud to say that the leaders of both of our chambers recognize that inequity that existed in that formula, and we fought hard to get it in. And I'm happy to see that happened this budget cycle.
But in each one of our communities, there are local roads and then there are state roads. So that money is for the local road. So even though you have a state road running right through the middle of your town, that state road might not be addressed. And that might, because it runs through the middle of your town, that might be the most heavily traveled. But that goes back to the state dealing with that, not locally. Do I understand that correctly?
So we work with Mass Department of Transportation. And I will say Mass Department of Transportation has done a nice job of helping communities and identify, and they can offer a lot of technical assistance. And so we constantly get calls from folks saying, there's a state roadway, there's a pothole, there's a missing guardrail, there's litter issues. And so we typically work with our regional director of Mass Department of Transportation to try to resolve that issue and find out what the timeline is to get that road repaired. Again, we're not like the states out west or south where their roadways were built in the last 30 to 40 years. Our roadways, some of them are hundreds of years old and need the tender love and care and support of their communities and state government to make sure that we don't have a transportation system that is at the bottom in the country. We want to make sure it's at the top.
Let's switch gears now to one of the committees you're on, which is Labor and Workforce Development. Explain to me what that committee does and how it's benefiting your district and district across the state.
So the Labor and Workforce Committee, which I chair this session, is a committee that focuses in on things like worker protection, fair wages, labor protections for people. It's a bill that has roughly around 275 bills filed each session. And in fact, a lot of times, as your viewers probably know, it takes a while for bills to get passed
Right.
here in
Oh,
Massachusetts.
yeah.
So you get a lot of refile bills. This committee actually has a lot of brand new bills within it, which is really exciting. So take an emerging industry that we have. If you talk to a young person, what do they want to be? They want to be an influencer. I had to Google what that was when I first heard it. What is an influencer? It's someone who goes on social media
I can't believe that's a job. But
and I can't believe it's a job either, but people make a lot of money on it.
Right.
What we found in the last few years is that parents are making a lot of money off of their children by doing videos of their babies or TikTok videos or children. And obviously, if you're or a child actor, you have protections by labor laws
Right.
that protect you, your assets, your likeness going forward. So we actually have a bill before the committee this session, which I'm very interested in, that we're working on it because several people filed different versions of the bill to protect those childhood folks, those kids who are young, who are being filmed by their parents. Their parents are making a lot of money. How do they protect their likeness when they become
That's
an
a good
adult?
point.
How do they protect their assets if their parents are getting money and they're not seeing a share of it going
Right,
forward?
right.
So we have a bill before the committee that's protecting these, I'd say, childhood actors that are actually not protected by the Screen Actors Guild or any of the other protections that you might have. So a lot of times we're doing things to protect workers, but we also work a lot to make sure that we grow workforce development in this Commonwealth, making sure people get the jobs the skills that they need to get a job. I know you had Secretary Lauren Jones from Labor and Workforce Development. We work with her very closely on making sure that we support our workforce boards throughout Massachusetts so people can get the skills that they need. We also promote things like our free community college initiative that we've adopted here in Massachusetts, which has been great for Springfield Technical and Holyoke and GCC and BCC to grow that. But it's also good for our employers because they need the quality employees within their field in order to hire them. And that's what we're trying to work on. Another area that we fought back very heavily against is the closure of Westover Job Corps program, one of 3 Job Corps programs in Massachusetts funded by the federal government. But we did a lot of work with them to raise the awareness of what these Job Corps programs do, especially for our neediest of residents, some that might not have the ability to go out and get a job without the Westover Job Corps programs. And I'm happy to say that the federal government stopped putting that on the closing block. And it was a lot of work with our congressional delegation locally of highlighting the good work that they do.
We are up on our second commercial break. We'll be right back after this. Join us then.
This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry. This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.
Welcome back, everyone, to today's In Focus. Across the desk from me is State Senator Jake Oliveira. Senator, thank you again for joining me. Greatly appreciate your time. One of the things that I think is on the minds of every constituent across the Commonwealth is how our money is being spent, which comes down to the state budget. What are some of the big issues that you think and that are sort of like your big concerns when it comes to the state budget?
Healthcare, healthcare, healthcare. So just so you know, we have about a $60 billion budget each and every year. About $14 billion of it comes in the form of reimbursements from the federal government, most of it in Medicaid reimbursement. And so, we constantly get complaints of people, rightly so, saying, our taxes are, going up. We're paying more.
Right.
Why aren't we seeing the investments in education? Why aren't we seeing the investments in transportation? Why aren't we growing our economy? And a lot of times it goes back to healthcare is eating more and more of our budget each and every year. Of that nearly $60 billion budget, 55% of it is spent on healthcare here in the Commonwealth. So I usually go into classrooms and I'll do a show of hands. What do you think we spend the most money on? And the kids will raise and they'll say education or, roads or prisons or something like that. And I said, no, it's healthcare. And we have a healthcare crisis not just in the state, but in this country.
Yeah.
And it is completely broken. And so when you see healthcare eating more and more of that pie, if you go back 30 years ago, it was nowhere near 55% of the state budget. And so healthcare growing as a percentage of our budget squeezes out everything else that we want to invest in and make the quality of life for folks better here in the Commonwealth.
Americans are less healthy now than we were 30 years ago, driving those costs.
Yes.
We're at the doctors more frequently.
Yep. Luckily, we live in Massachusetts because nearly we have universal coverage of healthcare, but we have inequities when it comes to that delivery of the healthcare system. So the term deserts are brought up a lot.
Right.
And the Boston Globe just this past week had something called pharmacy deserts, where you can't have access to a pharmacy within a neighborhood, especially if you don't have a car or if you have transportation issues. And so we see deserts right in the city of Springfield. We see deserts in rural areas throughout Massachusetts. We also see a lot of food deserts that also adds
Childcare
to
deserts.
childcare deserts. We could go on about the deserts that currently exist, but on healthcare, it becomes even more of an urgent matter. But healthcare is also tied to our economy. The largest employer I have in my district is Bay State Health, with over 5,000 employees that live in the Hamden, Hampshire, and Worcester district alone. So it's also tied to our economy. So if you begin to pull away from that investment, then it impacts the economic vitality of residents of the Commonwealth. So we need to figure out a better way of delivering healthcare here in this Commonwealth, because it's not sustainable. Those billions of dollars that we spend on healthcare year in and year out that squeezes out all the rest of the priorities is not sustainable, even with our revenue growth. There's a lot of healthcare costs that are being passed on to the consumer as well, where it's becoming unaffordable to even get basic procedures. And that's unconscionable in the richest country in the world, where you have people that are splitting their prescription drugs. And that's why last year on the Senate side, we passed a major pharmaceutical drug bill that the House passed later and sent to the governor's desk, capping life-saving drugs for Massachusetts residents that are on healthcare at $25 for a monthly supply for things like heart medication, diabetes medication, things that people need to stay alive. And we also are trying to put on constraints on something called pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs, which are kind of middlemen that came up in the last 30 years. And those are the ones that are really gaining a lot of the profit in our healthcare system right now as go-betweens between the pharmaceutical company and the insurer and the doctors. So in Massachusetts, we're trying to hold them more accountable and empowering our state regulatory agencies to hold those PBMs accountable. In fact, Senator Warren, our U.S. Senator, and one of the most conservative U.S. Senators, Josh Hawley from Missouri, actually agree on this very issue and have filed legislation at the federal level to hold these PBMs accountable, because we need to contain healthcare costs. And one of the ways in which we need to do it is look at these major cost drivers, and PBMs are one of them right now.
Interesting. I've never heard of PBM.
Now, start researching it. You'll hear
Maybe
a lot
I don't
more.
want to.
We probably don't want to.
That is amazing. Unfortunately, Senator Oliveira, we're out of time, but fascinating conversation. If you're up to it, I would love to have you back in the room again. Absolutely. Fantastic. Great having you here.
Great. Nice being here, Patrick.
This is 22 News in Focus with Patrick Berry.